this is Wyatt, outside instead of inside at the desk. So I haven't done any videos for a while because I went and I lived out of a basically 9-foot, the core of the pop-up trailer was 9 foot. Lived out of that for 30 days with my wife and our dog. Now, it was a hell of an adventure. I mean, we went across country and back during that time. And these are the 10 lessons I learned from that experience. Check it out. First lesson I learned is that the soft shell limits you. Now, if you look, a lot of people use Harvest Toast and places like that, and really you can't use that with Popup. They don't allow units that aren't basically self-contained. The big limitation, of course, is the bathroom. But they just don't do pop-up trailers. So that's one limitation. Also, the places we could go were limited. You couldn't go into grizzly country without a hard shell. And the other part of that is boondocking is a lot easier when you can just park, jump into the back of the camper, and snooze. And you really can't do that with the pop-up. You can do it inside the car, and that's what we did just to get across the country and back. But it is a limitation. The other part of that is the whole thing is pretty addicting. I mean, 30 days is really addicting. The places we could go, the people that we saw were just amazing. The upper part of the Oregon coast, we were able to go to Bend, Oregon, and it was just phenomenal. Saw some parts of Washington, which I'm originally from, and just reconnected with family. So it was really a great trip and something I definitely would want to do again. The third lesson, it's easier than you think. Now, at first, it was like a lot of trepidation, especially during this time, during a pandemic and whatnot. It was like, oh man, what are these places? There were whole states I wanted to avoid. And I really didn't know how it would be crossing from one state to the next. I went on to different full-time RV living groups in Facebook, and I kind of got the temperature and really realized it was gonna be a lot easier than I thought. And indeed it was. Crossing and also just staying in a lot of these places. They do have some restrictions here and there, but for the most part, it was a lot easier than a lot of people would probably make it out to be. Fourth, there is no way that 30 days is enough. It's really just a honeymoon period, if you really think about it. You're out there for 30 days and you really are just getting a taste for things. I felt like I could just keep on going and going and going. And you have to realize, my wife and I were also doing some work while we're out there, both able to do this remotely, but some parts of it weren't sustainable to do that. So both of us were working a little bit while we were out there, but for the most part, we had the freedom to go and just explore. And there were a lot of places to explore. And indeed, 30 days, because of that, we didn't really get to feel necessarily that, that feeling you get when it's like the work really weaves in a lot more and you're not able to do everything and anything, meaning it's that vacation period, right? So, but 30 days is definitely not enough. You need to go a fair bit longer before getting the kind of, I feel like it would take a lot longer to really get the feeling of what it's like to be living full-time in a camper. Number 5 is carriers. One carrier is never enough. You found that no matter where you went, if you had those that I talked to that had 3 different carriers, and Google Fi has it where they automatically go from one carrier to the next. And so I'm kind of wishing I had that, because one carrier just doesn't do it. You really are going to have to, in certain situations, switch from one to the other. We had just one carrier. We had so many places where just no connection at all. And that really was kind of a bummer. We worked around it and it got it done. But, you know, those we were camping with had other carriers and they were doing just fine. So if you're going to do it, of course, you want multiple carriers, or look at Google Fi. It works automatically, moving from one carrier to the next. Of course, it is Google. But one of the really cool aspects, of course, was getting out there and nobody cares what you're doing. As long as you kind of leave them alone to do their own thing, they're going to leave you alone to do your own thing. So it's really, you're out there and you're connecting with different people if you want to, but you really don't have to. And in some cases, you know, some of these RV places, of course, you're always front and center, meaning people are always looking at your camper. Hey, what's your setup like? Blah, blah, blah. For the most part, though, people are just going about their thing and they're really not paying attention to what you're doing. So you're able to just kind of flow through these different spots and not really, you know, not really stand out at all because everybody else is doing the same thing. You can stand up like a sore thumb if you're the only one, you know, kind of camping. So people come over, hey, what are you doing, blah, blah, blah. This next one, when you go visit people, it's hard to remember that they have their own life and work going on. And so when you try to visit with them, it's, you know, they're not necessarily gonna have the same freedoms you will. And so even though they're only visiting for a little bit, sometimes it can seem like a really short time, but then when you look at the perspective of, okay, they're already fully in their life doing all their usual stuff, so they made time for you, it's great. But it seems like it's really short. Like, I'm visiting with family, I visited with them for a long time, but other people, they really only had a short time to visit, and then we were off doing the next thing. So just recognizing that not everybody's going to have the same freedoms if they're, you know, living in the area where you're visiting. Planning was key. We did all kinds of planning. We still did a whole bunch more research. The thing of it is, when things come up, little different surprises, or just you find some place and you're like, oh wow, this is really cool. You gotta be willing to like let go of your planning and just go for it, and just do the things that you might think, oh, well, let's go check this out instead. And you throw your plans out the window. They're there as a guide, but they shouldn't be there as cement. Like, you shouldn't be cemented to the whole idea that you have to do these things that you put out on your plan. It's good to have that planning because then you can see and do the things you want to. You just want to be ready for those surprises. They can be beneficial, they can also not be, but either way, you want to be able to take advantage of them. And we actually had one automotive surprise, of course, going out there, and we were lucky enough to have found a good mechanic and had that fixed and on the road within one day, which was amazing. We got really fortunate, really lucky in South Dakota, and really good mechanics. I'll be listing in the show notes. If you're in South Dakota, you should definitely look them up. If you see something and you want to do it, just go and do it, because you're not necessarily going to be able to circle it back around and do it later. Time just goes so fast. It's fast, but it's slow at the same time. And what ends up happening is you think, oh wow, you know, there's that cool thing. Well, let's just keep going, and we'll come back around and do it later. But what happens? Later never comes, and then, well, then you never do it. So if you see something and you really want to do it, just do it. I feel like a lot of people have just focused on the camper. It's like, here they are, and they're out there, but they all sit in their camper. We had this one spot we came to, we were the only ones outside. There were tons of other RVers, and they were all inside their camper. We never saw anyone come out of their camper. One other person we saw, actually, and they had this Mantis, which is really cool. If you ever see the Mantis, evidently it was built by a NASA engineer. They have the Mantis and other lines of them, and they're modular, and they're much more kind of geared towards those looking to do the outdoors rather than a traditional RVer, but really cool. He was the only, him and his family were the only ones out there, you know, I got to talk to and stuff. Everybody else was in their RVs. And it seems like if you look at channels on full-time RV living, a lot of the focus is on the tour of the van, the camper, or the living situation. And that's what's popular. Really, I found it was more beneficial to just ditch the camper, you know, use it as a home base, and then get out there and do things. And really, the camper became much more of a background element rather than the focus. And because we have a pop-up, one of the benefits of the pop-up is you're outside a whole lot, meaning you're cooking outside, you're pretty much doing everything outside. And that's, sometimes it's a drawback, because nobody wants to be outside when a bunch of other people are sitting there and watching you do everything. But it can come in handy, because then you're outside, and it forces you to be outside and just say, okay, I'm gonna go out there, I'm just gonna go do things, rather than, you know, getting so comfortable in your RV, your camper, that you don't get out there and do things. So really, it's more about leveraging the camper and that place as a jumping off point for going places and doing things and getting outside. So those were the 10 things. There's obviously a lot more, but those were the kind of the highlights. And it was a really fun trip. It's a 30-day adventure. And what's cool is I got way outside of my usual routines and saw life from a totally different perspective. It made me want to do a whole lot more of this. One of the interesting elements that I see a lot of full-time RVers and van lifers and other people gearing towards is having a home base, meaning right now during a pandemic, during this time, they're feeling the pinch and the need to have some sort of safe zone, safe area where they can just, a piece of land, someplace where they can go to and kind of hunker down, when there's a storm coming. There's a storm of different cultural, political, economic, and otherwise elements. It'll make it a lot harder to necessarily do the full-time RV living lifestyle, the digital nomadic lifestyle. But still, when you get out there, you realize people are still just doing it. I found anyway that they were less affected by all the different things going on. Getting out there and doing what they wanted to do, rather than letting the circumstances of these outer restrictions kind of make them not do it. There were still, obviously there's still things you need to consider, but for the most part, it was great to see that freedom still reign even during this very constrictive time. I feel like it gave me all kinds of different perspectives, and I'd love to do it again for a longer period of time. Goal is definitely, around 2-3 months of the year. Full-time would be great, but there's something to be said for this period of dormancy, meaning when you're out there full-time, it looks like you're always kind of on, so to speak, meaning you're always kind of moving. You might be able to stay in a location for a little bit of time, but there's something to be said for that dormancy period. Mother Nature has it where you have, wintertime, things go into dormancy, and then summertime, you're out there and vibrant. I think in general, humans have that tendency as well. They may not recognize it or acknowledge it, but for the most part, I think there's a bit of dormancy that's needed to be allowed. And I think that can come through more easily when you have a home base and you can come back to and kind of rest and recuperate. It'd be great to have a home base for like 3 months instead of 9 months. I think flipping that dynamic would be great, but currently, maybe a couple months and I'd be very happy with that. Kind of a European vacation in a way. Also, weaving work in there kind of makes it less of a vacation and more of a lifestyle during that time. So you still stay grounded with your work and you're not feeling like that is just like a vacation instead of actually living. It takes a huge weight off your shoulder because you're not shuffling all this stuff you need to do to a certain time period and then expecting to just escape from it all. And really, I don't know that in general, especially with online work, people are able to do that. So anyway, those are the 10 lessons learned from living in a Popup camper for 30 days. Hope you found this helpful. Be sure to subscribe if you want to hear more, and thanks a lot for watching.
Whoa, look at this Addictive. Excuse me.
Oops.